Hey, I'm Jon Gordon with Positive University, and I'm with my friend Mike Robbins. Mike is an author of a number of books, and he has a new one coming out. Actually, by the time you watch this, it will already be out. It's called Bring Your Whole Self to Work. It's an amazing book. Mike, tell us about that book, and what does it mean to bring your whole self to work?
Well, first of all, John, it's good to see you. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on. I think this idea of bringing your whole self to work, for me, for the last 17 years, I've been speaking all over the country and around the world and working with lots of teams and leaders. And really, at the core of what I try to teach and embody myself is a sense of authenticity. And can we fully show up and be ourselves? And from working with so many great teams over the years, when you have that kind of environment on a team where people feel safe and they feel like they can be themselves, we don't all have to look the same, act the same, talk the same, have the same ideas, then much more creativity, innovation, and success can happen. So that's what bringing your whole self to work is really all about.
You've worked with some incredible organizations and teams. Just share a little bit about your work and what you do with these organizations when you work with them.
Yeah, I'm really fortunate. I live here in the San Francisco Bay Area, near Silicon Valley. So I've had a chance to work with a lot of technology companies and companies in lots of different industries, even some, pro sports franchises like you get to work with as well. And a lot of, again, my background, I was an athlete for many years. I played baseball growing up. I got drafted out of high school by the Yankees. I didn't end up signing with the Yankees because I got a chance to play baseball at Stanford in college. And then out of college, I got drafted by the Kansas City Royals and I signed a pro contract. Went into the minor leagues as you do in baseball. Unfortunately for me, my third season in the minors, I tore ligaments in my elbow as a pitcher and I blew my arm out. And after 3 surgeries in a couple of years, I had to walk away from baseball, which was personally really challenging. But one of the things that I loved most, in addition to the game itself, was I was fascinated by the whole team dynamic. Because I was on some teams over the years playing baseball where we had great talent, but not very good teams. And then I was on some other teams where the talent was, was good. It wasn't fantastic, but the team was outstanding. And in sports, as of course, John, you know this, and a lot of people listening to us, watching us know this, we call that chemistry, right? No one can quite define what it is, but when you have it, and you definitely know when you don't have it. And when I left sports and got a job, I was working in the tech world about 20 years ago during the dot-com boom. I realized very quickly, that chemistry thing that I erroneously thought was related to sports, that has nothing to do with sports. It's a human thing. In business, we call it culture. So when I started my business 17 years ago, I really, like your hat, right? That's what I wanted to do, was try to figure out what are the key drivers that create that kind of positive culture. And drawing on my experience as an athlete and then starting to research and study it a bit, that's really what my books are about, particularly this new book. And that's what I try to do when I come in and work with my clients, is help them consciously build that positive, productive kind of culture for their teams.
I know people that knew you when you were a baseball player. They said you were an amazing pitcher. You obviously pitched at Stanford, so you had to be really good. What made you a great pitcher? You have to have a great mindset to be able to do that.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. For me, as an athlete, I was fortunate to be left-handed, which is a benefit as a pitcher. But I'm not huge. I'm barely 6 feet tall. I was, I used to, in the program, it would say 6'2", 195 pounds. That was a lie, right? But, so I wasn't the biggest or the strongest or the fastest. I didn't have the best arm. And so what I learned early on, I had some talent, but I really had to just give it everything that I had. And so one of the things that, a lot of my teammates would say about me that I really appreciated was they knew that when I went out to pitch, I was going to leave it all on the field. And, a lot of baseball pitching in particular, it is very mental. So there's both the positive side to that. I was really a student of the game. The negative side, John, though, of that was it's easy in a sport, especially like baseball, to get in your head. And so one of the things I found to be most challenging was when I would fail, when I would struggle, and I could easily go into a very negative spiral about that. And with baseball and pitching in particular, you go out to pitch and then you have a bad game and you have to wait another 5 days until you get to pitch again. So it's different than other sports where you sort of just get right back in there and play again. So, I think that the mental side helped me and at times hindered me. But the biggest thing that I think I learned and I tried to do as an athlete was just give it everything that I had. Because when it's all said and done, again, whether it's sports or business or parenting or marriage or life, it's we don't want to look back and say, I wish I would have tried harder.
in your great talks, you tell a story about when they pull you out of a game if you're not pitching well. Share some of that story. I love that.
Yeah, well, one of the things, so one of the principles in Bring Your Whole Self to Work is about appreciation. And I've been talking about appreciation for years, but I make this distinction between recognition, which is about performance, and appreciation, which is really about people. And particularly for managers and leaders, but for everybody in business to understand the difference between these two things and why they're important. So we recognize people when they succeed and they perform well, but we don't when they don't. But we can appreciate people all the time. And the example I use is as a pitcher. And again, most of people listening or watching probably know what happens to the pitcher in the baseball game when the pitcher doesn't do well, right? They literally stop the game and the manager comes out to the mound and takes the ball out of your hand and makes you leave. And John, when I'm talking about this to, business people and to leaders and people, I often say, imagine you're at your desk, you're working hard and you're in the middle of something, you make like a mistake, like a big one. And all of a sudden your manager, your boss walks into the room and says, hey, stop right there. Get out. And you have to like pick up your stuff and leave, and some other person down in your chair, right? But the thing about the pitching part, right? I mean, that would be pretty humiliating. Imagine also thousands of people are watching it happen. But the worst part was when I would come out of the game after having a bad game and he'd take me out, I'd go sit down in the dugout on the bench, and my teammates would just like leave me alone. Because that was kind of the culture, like, oh, leave him alone, he's upset. But what I really could have used in that situation was not some recognition. I didn't deserve any recognition. I just failed. We're probably going to lose the game, but some appreciation for me, like, hey man, you're an important part of the team, or, we got your back. We believe in you. I mean, some genuine sense of appreciation for me as a human being, not simply just as the guy that just failed and probably lost the game for the team, because that's one of the things that happens. Again, we don't want to celebrate failure at all, but we got to make sure we're paying attention to the people behind the successes and the failures.
I love that. So you wrote the book, Focus on the Good Stuff. You wrote Be Yourself. Everyone else is already taken, right?
Yep.
You've written a number of these books, but now you come out with this book. Tell us more about this book and how it's different than your other books.
Well, my other three books really, Focus on the Good Stuff is about appreciation. So it's about a specific topic. Be Yourself, everyone else has already taken, is about authenticity. The last book I wrote is called Nothing Changes Until You Do, which is really about kind of self-compassion and mindset. These all are very focused on us as individuals and how we can transform personally. My new book, Bring Your Whole Self to Work, is definitely about sort of personal change and transformation. How can we take some ownership and show up more authentically and effectively at work? But it's also really about how can we lead those of us that happen to be in positions of leadership, management, but even if you're not a particular manager, like how can I have influence on the environment around me? And what can teams and organizations do to really create that environment of high performance? John, one of the things, Google's been a client of mine for the last 7 or 8 years, and I've learned a ton from them and some of the other great companies that I've worked with. But Google did a study a few years back that you may have heard of, called Project Aristotle. Yeah. And what they did, right, they started with their company. They were trying to solve for like, what are the conditions that create high performance? How do we have the most high performing teams? Because at Google, they're a really successful company, but some of their teams obviously perform better than others. Then they expanded it out further and looked at not just in their own company and their own industry, but across industry, across the world. Spent 3 years looking at all this data. And after spending all that time and crunching all the numbers and looking at everything, they came up with 5 key components that go into high performance. And the number one component was what they call psychological safety. And that means basically it's trust at a group level. That means, again, I can be myself, I can take a risk, I can fail, I can disagree, and I'm not going to get kicked out of the group. And you think about the teams that have the best chemistry or best culture, it's that sense of like, yes, we have a mission, we're passionate, we're connected to each other, but again, we pick each other up, we build each other up. So bringing your whole self to work is really about feeling like I don't have to leave things at home. I can bring my passion, I can bring my fear, I can bring my excitement, I can bring even my pain and my frustration. And we can, the way we work today, for better or worse, we're not showing up at 9 and going home at 5, right? We're working all the time, trying to have some balance in our own personal lives. And the work that we do for a lot of us is really important. So how do we build those relationships with each other that really matter?
Yeah, I love that about psychological safety. And you taught me an exercise. If you really knew me, you would know this about me. And you have a team do that where each person shares the answer to that question. Tell me about the power of that exercise and why it creates an emotional connection.
Yeah, no, I love that exercise. I learned it years ago from some mentors of mine, Rich and Yvonne Dutra St. John, who started a great program about 30 years ago called Challenge Day. It's actually a program for middle school and high school students that they do all over the world. And basically the idea of the exercise, and because you've heard me talk about it, and basically what I do, I mean, sometimes I'll do it if I'm speaking at a big event. I'll even have people pair up and do it. Sometimes if it's a workshop and I've got 50, 60, 100 people, we'll put them in small groups. My favorite way to do it is with a leadership team or an executive team or a team that I got 10, 12 people in a room, and maybe things are challenging or maybe things are really good, whatever the dynamics are. But basically what I do is I talk about authenticity and the importance of being real. I use the metaphor of the iceberg, that for us to be even more authentic with each other and create that psychological safety, we have to be willing to lower the waterline on our iceberg. And then I say, look, we're going to do an exercise, and I'm going to go first. So I always start. And I say, when it's your turn, you'll have about 2 minutes. And I just want you to repeat this phrase. If you really knew me, you'd know this about me. And I say, look, you don't have to say anything you don't want to say, but it's really about if we really knew you in this moment. If you lowered the waterline on your iceberg, what's going on? How are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you not saying? Just anything. And I'll start. And I just start with whatever's true in the moment, like what I'm feeling, what's going on in my life, what I'm sensing or noticing in the room. And my intention in doing that is just to be authentic, to be vulnerable, to make it safer for other people to do that. And then as we go around the room, now it's different with every team, and sometimes it goes deeper than others. But in general, and you've done this exercise with some teams before, what happens is people start to realize, oh, I can share some things that might be a little scary to say or vulnerable or put it out there. And instead of being judged or ridiculed or laughed at, it's both liberating, and then you realize, wow, it actually really connects me with the people in the room. Because the natural human response, Jon, to vulnerability is empathy. So when people share, if you really need, sometimes someone will share a story or a circumstance, and I can't relate to the specific that, I'm dealing with this, or, it might be a woman who's pregnant, or, a man who something happened in his life with his parents, or it's not some circumstance that I've either dealt with before or am dealing with in my life. But what I can always relate to is the human experience of it, the feeling of joy, of sadness, of fear, of excitement, of gratitude, of pain, whatever it is. It's like, oh, I can relate to that because I'm human. And what I find is, particularly when we talk about like inclusive teams and really wanting to include and really celebrate the difference, the paradox oftentimes is that, yes, we're all really different. We look different and come from different backgrounds. And at the same time, down below the waterline, the further we go, the more similar we become. So I love doing that exercise. And the conversation that comes after is often fascinating because people are like, wow, they can work with people for months and years and not know things about them, or not know, I didn't know you felt that way, or I didn't know you were thinking about that, or I didn't know you were concerned about that. And people start to realize like, wow, we're spending a lot of time and energy performing for each other instead of actually connecting with each other.
That's powerful. Have you seen tears flow from this exercise?
Oh yeah. And it's interesting, the thing about the crying that happens or the tears that come, often people get mad. Why don't you make me cry? And I'm like, listen, I'm never trying to make anyone cry. However, sometimes when we feel safe enough to actually get real, what comes out first is some emotion we've been holding on to that we're afraid, we can't express, and then we do. But Jon, what's interesting about tears? And I wrote a chapter actually in my last book about this, and you'll appreciate this because I know you work with a lot of football teams and you're such a football fan. There was a moment that happened. This was a few years back in San Francisco when the 49ers were still good. Right. But I remember, sometimes in football, which is amazing because football is like one of those examples of something that's like so tough and so strong and just right. Like, and the Niners had been bad for a long time. And then Jim Harbaugh came in and they had their first good year and they're in the playoffs. And Vernon Davis, who was their big tight end and had, been this high draft pick and had come in and hadn't had much success and was really ridiculed by the media and people were, he'd had a pretty good year. Well, he ends up catching this game-winning touchdown at Candlestick Park for the Niners to win this playoff game. And it was a huge deal. And he comes off the field, tears streaming down his face. And he and Harbaugh embrace on the sidelines for like a minute. And the cameras are on him and Harbaugh's saying something into his ear. And, who knows what he was saying to him. But in that moment, I'm watching the game, and I've been a San Francisco 49ers fan since I was a kid. And they had been bad for a long time. So it was a big moment in sports. But just watching that, I was like, wow. And people weren't making fun of Vernon Davis. They weren't laughing at him and because, he's this big, huge, strong dude. But to me, it was just this moment of, 60,000 people in the stadium, probably millions of people watching the playoff game on television. And it was this moment of vulnerability, of human connection. And you can imagine like what that meant to him personally, to his coach, to the team. And so again, back to the exercise, sometimes when tears show up, it's never the point of the exercise. But what I find happens is we realize, oh, wow, like, I know it sounds so basic, but like people are human. And when we really connect to the humanity of each other, even if sometimes we get annoyed or we have different values or different personality styles, it's just easier to get along. It's easier to work out conflict, and it's easier to, collaborate together that way.
What do you say to the person who says, if I share something, it's going to be used against me, and so they don't feel safe?
It is a risk. It's definitely a risk, right? I mean, and that's happened to all of us. So we have to be mindful of that. But at the same time, I think of the definition of vulnerability that I love from Dr. Brene Brown. And she says vulnerability is risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty. So think about that: risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty. And one of the questions that I've heard her ask before that I often ask to people is, can you think of anything meaningful or important that you've ever accomplished or experienced in your life, personally or professionally, that did not involve risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty? Right? I mean, look, again, I don't mean to just keep talking about sports, but it's one of the things I love the most about sports is it's a vulnerable act, right? The teams go on the field, or they get on the court, or even athletes individually jump into the pool, or whatever sport it is, right? In soccer, they're on the pitch, and it's vulnerable. You don't know what's going to happen. You might lose and you might fail publicly, even if you're really, really talented. And that's true in life and in business. We put ourselves out there in whatever capacity, right? John, you and I write books and give speeches. It's like, it's a vulnerable, even though I love it, I know you love it. I get up on stage and there's a moment, usually right before I speak, that I go, this is a bad idea, right? It could go wrong, or it could go badly, or I could make a fool of myself, or people could like roll their eyes or look at their phones or think, this guy's an idiot. But if we're not willing to step into that, we can't get the reward that comes with it, the impact that we can have, right? So back to the person who's afraid, if I share this, they're going to use it against me. That is possible. Absolutely. However, I think more often than not, the energy it takes for us to withhold things creates more internal stress for us and more disconnection with other people. But we also have to realize, it is a risk. But I think of something that a mentor of mine said to me years ago, John. He said to me, Mike, you're living your life as though you're trying to survive it. And I said, yeah, so? He said, you have to remember something really important. I said, what's that? He said, nobody ever has. Right? So we have to, look, there are risks involved in life, but if we're willing to put ourselves out there, there's a lot of opportunity and upside. And there's the potential downside of getting hurt, getting embarrassed, getting it used against us.
Should the leader create some rules of engagement, though, in these exercises, sort of like what is shared in the room stays in the room? Dabo Sweeney called it the safe seat because it was a safe place to share and be vulnerable. What are your thoughts from a leadership perspective on that?
No, I think that's really important to create. Even just in that exercise I shared, and I come in, I'm the speaker, I'm the outside consultant, I'm right. But I say, look, one of the things I want to say to make this safe is that whatever people share, we keep it in here, or if they're paired up or in small groups. But for leaders, I often say to leaders this: first of all, if you want your team to be open and real with you, you got to go first, because if you don't, it's not that they can't, but it makes it 10 times harder for them to be vulnerable if you don't show any vulnerability. So that's one thing leaders can do, is model it. But even in conversations like that, or in certain situations like, hey, look, everybody, we're going to talk openly. We're going to share ideas, disagree, share personal stuff, but we're going to create this safe space, this safe container in here that it's airtight. We're not, I think of something someone told me a few years back, a leader that I worked with. He worked for a big retail brand, and he was the head of HR at the time, and their president left abruptly, and they didn't have a new president to replace the president. So they decided, for the time being, while they were searching for a new president, they were going to have the 4 people sort of on the executive team of the brand run the brand as kind of, co-presidents, which is a really tough situation. And what they realized, he said, the first meeting they had, and they all knew each other and respected each other, but they said, look, people are going to come at us and try to divide us, and they're going to try to sort of pitch us on different things, and we have to stay united. But they made an agreement. They said, for however long this exists, we can be divided when we're together in this room. We can scream and yell at each other, and we can have disagreements and get mad. But when we leave this room, we have to be united, whatever we decide. Because if we don't, the brand is going to go sideways, and it's going to be a problem for everybody, and particularly for the new president who comes in. And he said it was hard, but they really made a commitment that they would get real. They would hash things out with each other in that room, just the 4 of them. But when they walked out of the room, whatever they decided was we're all on board. Even sometimes I thought it was a terrible idea. I'm not throwing anybody else under the bus. And that's one of the challenging things for leadership teams, John, that I see is How do we create that sense of alignment so that we can disagree and discuss and debate and have it out, but then walk out of the room and we're aligned? Because any misalignment with leadership teams in particular creates exponential misalignment down through the organization.
Will your new book help create alignment and connection amongst the leadership team?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the intention. What I'm really trying to talk about, and there's particular exercises like the If You Really Knew Me exercise that we talked about and others in the book, where I'm really challenging leaders and teams to like, look, some of this stuff is hard, right? You know, another mentor of mine said this other great thing to me years ago. Mike, he said to me, Mike, you know, what stands between you and the kind of relationships you really want to have with people? And I said, what's that? He said, it's probably a 10-minute sweaty palm conversation that you're too afraid to have. And he said, if you have the courage to have those sweaty palmed conversations, you'll have great relationships. He said, but if you don't, you'll sort of just be a victim of whoever you work with and live with and or interact with. So one of the challenges that I have in the book for people at any level in an organization, but particularly for leaders, be willing to have those sweaty palm conversations and have them sooner rather than later. Do them with respect, do them with kindness, do them with authenticity, because what ends up happening, because that can be uncomfortable, we don't address things. And then again, like let's say you and I work together and we're upset with our manager, our boss, or someone else on the team, but we don't know how to address it, or we're a little afraid, or if we do, he or she might get upset with us. So then you and I go out to lunch and we talk about him or her, and we, oh yeah, it's, you know, and then we go back to work and we act really nice because we don't want to get in trouble and we're doing the right thing. But over time, that starts to erode the relationship we have, not just with our manager but with the team. Because now we got factions and these conversations and those conversations. And what I often say to teams is like, be willing to have the conversation in the room. Like, what's the conversation you're going to have in 15 or 20 minutes when you huddle up with someone, or when you text them later, or when you debrief? Have that conversation now. Save yourself some time. Yeah, it might be a little uncomfortable, but ultimately it's going to be more productive.
What do you say to those who say business and personal shouldn't coexist, that business isn't personal, don't make it personal?
Well, look, I mean, I think there's always going to be a distinction between our personal lives and our professional lives, clearly. However, I really believe that, and I've seen this over the last 17 years in my own work, John, you've probably seen this as well. The worlds of the personal and the professional are coming together in so many ways. Again, some of it's just the way we work. You know, work's gotten a little more casual. We work from home. We work virtually. People are working in, you know, especially global organizations where people are literally working around the clock. So work's happening all the time. But I also think that, you know, because we do tend to spend so much time at work, if we feel like we have to compartmentalize, okay, here's my personal self and here's my professional self, it ends up causing a problem for us in both arenas. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this. I know I can. There's times that I'm at home and I'm with Michelle, my wife, and our girls, Samantha and Rosie, and like my head is completely in my work. I'm not present. You know, we could be out on vacation somewhere great and I'm somewhere else. And on the flip side, I'm sometimes on the road, you know, out speaking, doing my work, and like my head's back home, which again is a normal challenge that I think most of us face in life, in whatever kind of work we do. But how do we integrate that more in a way that's healthy, that's productive? You know, that if I need to say to my wife or to my girls, you know what, hold on a second, I'm going to go check one thing real quick so I can get it off my mind, so I can come back and be more present here with you, right? Or again, everyone's had this experience. You're at work, you're in a meeting, something's going on, and like one of your kids is sick, or you just had a fight with your spouse, or, you know, one of your parents is, or whatever. And again, not that you need to tell the whole world that, but sometimes it can be helpful and healthy to go, hey, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted right now. You know, my father's in the hospital. And in that moment, it's like, okay, I still have to do my job. I still have to show up. But then everyone else goes, oh, okay, I understand. Do you know what I mean? And so those things, just in a real practical sense, if you're a manager or a leader, you want to know, not to be nosy, but you want to know a little bit about what's going on in people's lives so that you can support them most effectively.
Is it helpful to have a relationship outside of work with your team members so you can be more productive at work?
I think so. I mean, it's tricky, right? I think you can't force it. And some people, and I respect and understand, they're like, look, I want to keep things very professional. So, I mean, I think when I see teams where they have really strong personal relationships outside of work, it can be super beneficial. However, sometimes the downside of that, as we've all learned, is, you know, again, let's say you're my boss and we're super friendly and we hang out and we go to the ball game and we, you know, hang out after work and have a beer and do whatever. That's all good. And then you have to give me some critical feedback. And I'm like, yo, man, aren't we boys? Aren't we friends? And you're like, oh, actually, I'm your boss, right? So that can be tricky. However, even if we don't have really strong personal relationships where we spend time outside of work. I think having situations or times where as a team you can do things that aren't necessarily work related. Like I was just down in Florida actually last week speaking at a couple of events for Wells Fargo. And one of the things that they did, these were recognition events, but they had a lot of fun activities. They also had community service activities where they were putting meals together, or they were, building bikes or doing these great things. I'm sure, John, you've seen this at events you've spoken at over the years, right? And doing something like that. I mean, yeah, there's the team building part of it, but there's also just the personal part of it. You get to know people more and understand what matters to them, who matters to them. So again, those type of things. I mean, I love speaking at events and being at offsites because I think getting out of the office and getting into another environment, it changes people's mindset and their state. And even again, conversations about, I've seen this also that I really like. Teams will have, as a way to introduce a new team member, they'll get up and give a presentation, but about their lives and sort of tell their story and share slides and photos of, this is me when I was a kid, or this is my family. And again, just to kind of give us more of a well-rounded sense of who we're working with.
So much good stuff. Mike, I also love to ask personal questions. I want to ask you a few questions. Yeah. One is how do you stay positive through challenges? And then after that, I'm going to ask you the Triple H, which is a team building exercise I do.
Okay. How do I stay positive during challenges? I think, first of all, I'm super blessed to be married to just an amazing woman. Michelle is somebody who, we've been together for almost 18 years, and she balances me out in a really good way. My work and my life and everything that I do is really focused on being positive. And I know from you and I being friends over the years and talking about this, I can also be really negative and critical if I'm not mindful of it. So a lot of the practices for me that I've created over the years have helped. I keep a gratitude journal. Going out and speaking and writing, quite frankly, there's a self-serving part of doing this work, John, for me, because the more I talk about these things, the more I have to actually listen to myself talk. I'm like, hey, that's a good idea, But there are times, I'll call Michelle up, I'll be on the road and I'll say, gosh, I don't know, babe, can I really get up and be a depressed motivational speaker in this moment? But, having a conversation with her about it and having her be able to remind me and sort of catch me, if you will, when I fall. But another thing that I do actually is both personally, but sometimes even in my work, is share some of the struggle and some of the challenge, not to whine and complain about it, but just as a way to practice what I preach around authenticity and vulnerability. And I find, ironically, sometimes sharing the challenge, even though on the surface it can seem negative, is actually a more authentic way for me to shift into something more positive. I think sometimes pretending like everything's great and I'm awesome is actually stressful and it's inauthentic for me personally. And I don't know that it necessarily works.
Yeah, that's great stuff. So Triple H, who is your hero or one of your heroes?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. The first person that just popped into my mind when you said that was my high school basketball coach, Don Lippy. Don and I are still in touch. In fact, there's a story in the book about Don that I share. I wasn't a very good basketball player, but I played on our team. And there was a moment, and Don was really all about hustle and passion and giving it everything you had. And there was a moment that I got dunked on in a high school basketball game my junior year in the other team's gym, which is the worst thing that can happen to you as a high school basketball player. But I got back on defense after getting the ball stripped from me. And this kid dunked on me and the crowd went crazy and I fouled him and he went to the line for a 3-point play and I'm laying on the gym floor and my teammates are even all staring at the floor. There's nothing really to say because it was pretty awful. But Coach Lippy was over on the sideline, over on the bench, cheering, jumping up and down, pointing at me, going, way to go, Robbins, way to hustle. That's what we want. And it's I'll never forget that. It really made a difference for me in that moment, but also just in my life that sometimes, again, back to the vulnerability thing, it's can we put ourselves out there, even if we might fail and get dunked on or whatever version of that might be, and just know it's really about the courage to do it and to hustle, even if it doesn't go well.
That's good. What about a hardship that you faced, a defining moment in your life that helped you become who you are today? That's the hardship.
I think, there's a number of them. Obviously the end of my baseball career was a big one. That was many years ago. But, something I write about in the introduction to Bring Your Whole Self to Work is my sister Lori passed away about 2.5 years ago after a 4-year battle with cancer. And, it was, and even still is 2.5 years later, still surreal that, both my parents are gone and my sister's gone now. But I have to say, Jon, going through the grief of that, but also reflecting a lot on my sister and her life and what she taught me. Someone asked me the other day in an interview, as I was talking about my sister, what did she teach you? What did you learn from her? And I was really able to reflect on, one of the things I'm most passionate about is connecting with people and building relationships, both personally and in my business professionally. And I realized I just modeled my older sister when I was a kid. Like, she was such a great friend, and she loved people, and she knew everybody's birthday, and she knew things about people, and she just genuinely cared. And so I just wanted to be like her. So I just watched how she interacted with her friends, and that's what I tried to do. And at her memorial service, one of her friends came up to me and said, when we were like in 7th grade, Lori told me that she loved me. This is a girlfriend of hers. And she's like, I'd never had another friend. No one outside of my family had ever said that to me. And I thought it was weird and it was kind of uncomfortable. But I said, I love you too, because I did, even though I felt strange about it. And she always said that. And so anyway, I think about that hardship and that difficulty, but I also think about so many of the blessings that have come even from the pain of that.
Yeah, I've lost both my parents. I have a brother still and other family members, stepbrothers, stepsisters. What's it like? What does it feel like? Is it strange knowing that both your parents are gone and your sister's gone and it's you? Because it feels weird to not have parents myself. Like, I think about, like, I don't have parents right now.
Yeah, it is weird, right? That when you lose one and then both parents, it's like what I realized, Jon, and now with Lori too, my whole nuclear family. I have an older half sister, Rachel. We have the same father, but we didn't grow up together. And Rach and I are actually really close, but we don't have shared memories. We didn't grow up in the same house. So there's nobody in my life, like Michelle and my girls. And there are times I have memories or thoughts or story. What happened when, and again, my sister was my older sister. So and she had an unbelievable memory. So I could call her up on the phone and say, Lori, remember when I was like 4 and what happened? And she'd tell me the whole story. So that part is a bit disorienting, I have to say, and strange. Or big moments will happen in life. And I'm sure you can relate to this with your parents being gone. It's like wanting to be able to call my mom or call my dad or share something. Or, I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was in New York City, and then I went up and I spoke at Harvard, which was really cool. And my mom would have been so proud and excited. And my sister would have been so excited. And it was just this like I know they're out there. I know they're looking down and they can see it and feel it. But it is strange and it is disorienting. And at the same time, I don't say this with any disrespect to my parents or my sister. There's also a weird part of it that's kind of liberating too, because like, I don't have to worry about what would they think or would they judge this, or, you know what I mean? So I've tried to embrace some of the oddly positive aspects of it in the midst of it being kind of strange and disorienting and painful.
Yeah, my mom would have been like, you spoke at Harvard, that's awesome, but you never became a lawyer. I'm so disappointed.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
So last question on the Triple H highlight. What's a highlight in your life besides speaking at Harvard that, when you think about your life, it shines through?
Gosh, lots of highlights. I think, the moment that just popped into my head, there's so many, but the moment that popped into my head was actually when I proposed to Michelle. It was 2004. We'd been dating for a few years. We'd been living together, and it was, anyway, there was a whole sort of story behind it, but I was able to, we went up to the top of what's called Mount Tamalpais. It's here in Marin County, where I live, a little north of San Francisco. And it was, even though it was August, we get a lot of fog in the Bay Area. The whole Bay Area was fogged in, but the very top of Mount Tam, it was clear. And there's another mountain over in the East Bay called Mount Diablo. And so the only thing you could see was the top of Mount Diablo across with it was like surreal, it was almost like we were in heaven. You know what I mean? And, I just, it was so, and it was funny because I talk so much. It's what I do for a living. But in that moment, as I got down on my knee to propose, nothing came out. And she's looking at me like, what is the matter with you? I've never seen you at a loss for words. And it was just this sort of surreal, exciting, scary moment when I asked her and she said yes. And it was pretty cool, man. It was pretty cool.
That's awesome. So what are you excited about going forward?
I'm really excited about this new book. I'm excited about my work. I'm excited about the interesting challenge. You're a few years down the road for me in parenting. Our girls are 12 and 9, so I am excited, although a little scared about the teenage years, and they're coming. But I'm excited, so I got a lot to look forward to.
What's it like to raise girls?
It's interesting. I grew up with an older sister in my house, and an older half sister was raised by a single mom. So I'm kind of always used to having females in my house. I just assumed, I don't know if you were this way, John, as a man, I just always assumed I would have a son or sons. I thought maybe I'd have one of, I don't know. But the funny thing is every now and again I wake up and I just look at Michelle and I go, we have girls. I mean, it's, we're 12 and 9 years into this thing. But I do think right now with everything happening in the world and so many things, I think it's really important. I read a book many years ago that a friend of mine gave to me when Samantha was about 2 called Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters, written by a doctor named Meg Meeker, who and I love this book. I've read it like 4 or 5 times. And the book really talked about how the father-daughter relationship is so fundamental. I mean, of course, every relationship, father-son, mother-daughter, but just the specific nature of the father-daughter relationship. And, as my girls continue to get older, and now our older daughter is in puberty and I'm getting more eye rolls and it's changing, and I've changed from daddy to dad, just continuing to step into that role. And at times very vulnerably admitting to each of my girls, particularly my older one, like, hey, listen, I'm doing the best I can. I don't know how to do this. Like, I've never been a dad of a 12-year-old daughter before. Give me a break. And that seems to, when I pull that one out every now and again, when it's true, it seems to work. She'll stop and go, oh yeah, I guess that's right.
Yeah, I have a daughter and a son, so it's completely different raising a daughter and a son. And there's nothing like a daughter. I mean, there's nothing like having a daughter. It's great having a son too, but just the dad-daughter dynamic is really special.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
So Mike Robbins, thank you so much. I want to thank you for bringing your whole self to the work that you do and the impact that you have. I mean, your vulnerability and what you share is really powerful. I've seen you speak several times, and I know the impact you're having on teams and organizations. And I've been encouraging you to, bring a book like this to the workplace. Yeah. And I'm so glad it's finally out, because I know it's going to impact a lot of teams, a lot of organizations, a lot of people. Any final thoughts as we leave?
Well, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, thank you for saying that, and thanks for having me on here. I want to say to everybody listening and watching this, and John, to you, but I mean, you and I have been friends. We met about 10 years ago or so, sort of virtually and in the work that we do, but we've become friends, and I just really appreciate your friendship. And you're the real deal, man. You've been such an incredibly generous, wonderful friend and mentor to me over these years. So, I mean, I'm sure everybody who follows you and reads your books and hears you speak knows that, but I just want to say that here to you, but also publicly. So thank you for that. And, you definitely are somebody who walks your talk. And I also just want to say to everybody listening, I mean, I think bringing our whole selves to work is important, but I also think it can be challenging. So I think it's important for us to be kind and compassionate with ourselves, even and especially when we fail. We can pick ourselves up. We can apologize if our intention is good and positive. Usually things have a way to work themselves out.
Well, I hope my Dodgers and your Astros will play in the World Series again. Yeah. And I hope this year the result is different.
Yes. We'll see how that goes. But
you worked with them. I worked with the Dodgers, and your team won. So I want to give you credit for that. Well, you're obviously a more powerful speaker than me.
Well, it happens on the field, but I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Take care.